The sun hung low over Panorama Street, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns and whispering through the leaves of ancient oaks that lined the block. It was the kind of neighborhood you'd see in a brochure for suburban bliss, quiet, orderly, with just enough charm to make you forget the chaos of the city a few miles away. Kids rode bikes in lazy circles, sprinklers hissed in rhythm, and every mailbox seemed to gleam with fresh paint. For Evan Carter, a retired Army Explosives Ordnance Disposal (ED) specialist, this was supposed to be paradise. After 15 years defusing bombs in war zones and later consulting for Homeland Security, he'd earned his slice of peace. All he wanted was a small garden, a cold beer on the porch, and the kind of silence that didn't come with the threat of a detonation. But paradise, as Evan would soon learn, came with a catch. Her name was Karen. Evan had seen plenty of threats in his career: IEDs hidden in desert roads, suspicious packages in crowded markets, even a rigged car bomb outside an embassy. But none of those prepared him for the clipboard-wielding, blonde-bobbed menace that was Karen Thompson, president of the Panorama Street Homeowners Association, HOA. Karen wasn't just a neighbor. She was a force of nature, a suburban dictator who ruled the block with an iron grip disguised as community spirit. Her reflective sunglasses and ever-present clipboard were her weapons, and she wielded them with the precision of a drill sergeant. To Karen, every blade of grass, every curtain color, every mailbox shape was a battleground, and she was determined to win. Evan had bought the house on Panorama Street with his military pension, a modest two-story with a wraparound porch and a backyard big enough for the garden he'd always dreamed of. The shed in the back was a bonus, a sturdy, military-grade structure he'd negotiated with Homeland Security to use as a secure storage unit for training equipment. Nothing live, no active ordnance, just crates of mock explosives and disarmed devices used for ED drills. It was all legal, documented, and wired with enough security to make a bank vault jealous. Motion sensors, biometric locks, and a low-tier automated response system ensured that any unauthorized access would ping DHS faster than you could say, federal offense. The shed was off limits, and Evan made sure everyone knew it. Literal signs, big, bold, impossible-to-miss signs, were posted around it, including one with explicit federal language warning of consequences. To Evan, it was a small price to pay for the contract that supplemented his pension and let him keep a toe in the world he'd left behind. He'd moved in 3 weeks earlier, expecting the kind of welcome you get in tight-knit communities, maybe a casserole, a handshake, a few curious glances. Instead, he got Karen. She showed up at his doorstep on day one, her smile as sharp as a switchblade, clutching her clipboard like it was the Constitution. "Welcome to Panorama Street, Mr. Carter," she'd said, her voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that hides venom. "I'm Karen Thompson, HOA president. We have a few guidelines to go over." Evan, still unpacking boxes and nursing a coffee, nodded politely. He'd dealt with bureaucrats before. How bad could this be? Bad. Very bad. Karen's guidelines were a 20-page packet of rules so detailed they could have been used to govern a small country. Grass height couldn't exceed 3 inches. Outdoor furniture had to be a specific shade of beige. Holiday decorations required pre-approval. And then there was the shed. Karen's eyes had lingered on it during her tour of his property, her lips pursing like she'd tasted something sour. "That structure," she said, pointing at the shed with her pen, "is an eyesore. It doesn't comply with our aesthetic standards. You'll need to submit a variance request." Evan explained calmly that the shed was government registered, part of a DHS contract, and not subject to HOA rules. He even offered to show her the paperwork. Karen's smile tightened, and she scribbled something on her clipboard. "We'll see about that," she said, her tone implying a war had just been declared. Evan tried to brush it off. He'd faced worse than an overzealous HOA president. In Yoda, he'd disarmed bombs under gunfire. In DC, he'd navigated the egos of Homeland Security brass. Karen was just a nuisance, a mosquito buzzing around his new life. He figured she'd lose interest once she realized he wasn't intimidated. So he went about settling in, planting tomatoes in the garden, fixing up the porch, and waving at neighbors who seemed friendly but cautious, like they were waiting for something to happen. Rick, the retired firefighter next door, was the exception. A burly guy with a penchant for iced tea and a parrot that swore in Spanish, Rick welcomed Evan with a grin and a warning. "Watch out for Karen," he said, leaning over the fence. "She's not just annoying. She's dangerous when she's bored." Rick's stories painted a vivid picture. Karen had once called the police on a neighbor for unlicensed wind chimes. She'd fined a disabled veteran for a ramp that didn't match the community aesthetic. She'd even tried to ban a kid's lemonade stand for operating without a permit. The neighborhood, Rick explained, had learned to tiptoe around her. Most people paid her fines or followed her rules to avoid the drama. Those who fought back usually moved away, worn down by her relentless harassment. "Why doesn't anyone stand up to her?" Evan asked, sipping a beer on Rick's porch. Rick shrugged, his parrot squawking something unrepeatable. "Some fires aren't worth lighting unless you've got the hose and the backup engine." Evan decided to play it smart. He attended one HOA meeting, hoping to get a read on Karen's power base. The meeting was held in the community center, a sterile room with folding chairs and a projector screen. Karen stood at the front, her blonde bob gleaming under the fluorescent lights, commanding the room like a general. The agenda included a 25-minute debate over the acceptable shade of beige for patio furniture, followed by a lecture on proper mailbox maintenance. Evan sat in the back, nodding politely but saying nothing. When Karen brought up his shed, calling it a potential safety hazard, he raised his hand and repeated that it was a federal matter. The room went quiet. Karen's eyes narrowed, but she moved on. Evan didn't go to another meeting. The welcome package Karen left on his doorstep the next day was less a gift and more a declaration of intent. It included a list of violations she'd already flagged, unapproved curtain colors, a rustic mailbox, and, of course, the shed. Each came with a fine, some predating his move-in date. Evan laughed it off, but the audacity stuck with him. He called his contact at DHS, a no-nonsense agent named Delgado, to confirm the shed's status. Delgado assured him everything was in order and advised him to document any interference. "Some people," she said, "think they're above the law because they've got a title and a grudge." Karen's campaign escalated subtly at first. She jogged by his house in her sandals, slowing down to peer over the fence. She'd linger near his backyard gate, pretending to measure hedges or walk her dog. Once, Evan caught her crouched by the gate, holding her dog's leash like it was a prop. "Just checking on things," she said, her smile all teeth. "That shed's awfully suspicious. Mind if I take a look inside?" Evan kept his tone even. "It's not open for tours, Karen. It's a secure facility." Her smile faltered, but she pressed. "I'm the HOA president. I have a right to know what's on the street." Evan leaned closer, his voice low but firm. "Opening that shed without permission is trespassing. It might even trigger a federal response." Karen laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound, but Evan wasn't joking. He'd seen the system in action. One wrong move, and DHS would be on her doorstep faster than she could say community standards. He told Rick about it later, expecting a laugh. Instead, Rick's face darkened. "She's not gonna let this go," he said, stirring his tea. "Karen's got a nose for trouble, and she's bored. That's a bad combo." Rick shared more stories. The time Karen reported a neighbor's unauthorized bird feeder. The time she tried to find a family for a basketball hoop. "She's got too much time and not enough sense," Rick said. "And she hates being told no." Evan nodded, filing it away. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he wasn't backing down either. He'd spent his career staying calm under pressure. If Karen wanted a war, she'd have to fire the first shot. To be safe, Evan took precautions. He installed a trail camera aimed at the shed, its lens hidden in a fake birdhouse. He double-checked the sensors, ensuring the biometric locks were active and the motion detectors were synced to the DHS server. He even added a new sign to the shed door, red letters on white. Federal property. Unauthorized access prohibited. Violators will be prosecuted. It was overkill, maybe, but Evan knew better than to underestimate an enemy, even one armed with a clipboard. He kept living his life, tending his garden, sipping coffee on the porch, waving at neighbors who started to warm up to him. Mrs. Tran, an elderly woman across the street, brought him a plate of homemade dumplings one day, whispering, "Don't let that woman scare you." Evan smiled. "I've handled worse." But Karen was relentless. Her inspections became more frequent, her notes more aggressive. She left passive-aggressive letters in his mailbox, citing concerns about the shed's appearance and demanding a meeting with the HOA board. Evan ignored them, forwarding each one to Delgado for the record. He wasn't worried about the shed itself. It was impregnable, and the feds had his back. What bothered him was the principle. He'd fought for freedom, for safety, for the right to live without someone breathing down his neck. Now, in his own home, he was dealing with a tyrant in designer sunglasses. It wasn't just annoying. It was personal. The neighborhood, meanwhile, watched from the sidelines. Some neighbors avoided Evan, wary of getting on Karen's bad side. Others, like Rick, offered quiet support. "She's been running this place like her personal kingdom for years," Rick said one evening, his parrot squawking in agreement. "Folks are scared to push back. But you? You're not scared. That's why she's fixated on you." Evan shrugged. "I'm not here to start trouble. I just want to be left alone." Rick raised his glass. "Good luck with that." As the weeks passed, Evan settled into a rhythm. He planted more tomatoes, fixed a squeaky gate, and started to feel the weight of his old life lift. The nightmares from Yoda, flashes of sand, and shrapnel came less often. The shed, for all its controversy, was a reminder of his past, but also his control over it. It wasn't a threat, it was a tool, a piece of his expertise preserved in a quiet corner of suburbia. He inspected it weekly, logging every detail for DHS. The crates were sealed, the mock devices inert, the robot, nicknamed Otis, powered down in its charging dock. Everything was as it should be. But Karen wasn't done. She started rallying allies, whispering to neighbors about the danger in Evan's backyard. She posted on the community forum, her words cloaked in concern, but dripping with accusation. "We deserve to know what's being hidden on our street," she wrote. "Safety first." A few people liked her post, but most stayed silent. Evan saw it for what it was, a power play. Karen didn't care about safety. She cared about control. And the shed, with its locks and signs and air of mystery, was a direct challenge to her authority. Evan kept his cool, but he was ready. He'd faced enemies who played dirty, who thrived on chaos. Karen wasn't a terrorist, but she was a bully, and bullies always made mistakes. He documented everything, her posts, her visits, her letters. He upgraded the trail cam to record audio. He even started locking his backyard gate, something he'd never bothered with before. "You're turning into a spook," Rick teased, watching Evan adjust the camera. "Nah," Evan said, grinning. "Just covering my 6." The tension simmered, but Evan refused to let it consume him. He focused on the good, his wife's laughter as they planned their garden, the way the neighborhood kids waved when they rode by, the quiet evenings when the only sound was crickets. Panorama Street was still paradise, or it could be, if Karen would just back off. But deep down, Evan knew she wouldn't. She was too invested, too obsessed. The shed wasn't just a structure to her. It was a symbol of everything she couldn't control. And Karen Thompson, HOA president, didn't like losing. So Evan waited. He tended his tomatoes, sipped his beer, and kept his eyes open. He didn't know when Karen would make her move, but he knew it was coming. And when it did, he'd be ready. The shed, with its blinking red light and federal backing, was more than a storage unit. It was a line in the sand. And Evan Carter, retired ED specialist, wasn't the kind of man to let anyone cross it. It was a crisp Tuesday morning, the kind where the air smelled of dew and the sun hadn't yet burned off the faint chill clinging to Panorama Street. Evan Carter backed his pickup truck out of the driveway, the tires crunching softly on the gravel. He was headed to the local garden center to pick up a few bags of mulch for his tomato beds, a quick errand that should have taken no more than 30 minutes. His wife, Lisa, was at work, the neighborhood was quiet, and the shed in his backyard, his government-registered, Homeland Security sanctioned storage unit, was locked up tighter than Fort Knox. Evan had no reason to suspect trouble. He dealt with Karen Thompson's passive-aggressive notes and nosy jogs past his fence for weeks, but he figured she'd stay in her lane while he was gone. He figured wrong. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the Panorama Street HOA, had been watching Evan like a hawk. Her obsession with his shed had grown from a minor annoyance into a full-blown crusade. To her, that squat, military-grade structure with its warning signs and biometric locks wasn't just an eyesore. It was a personal affront, a challenge to her authority. She'd spent days circling, scheming, and posting cryptic warnings on the community forum about suspicious activity on Evan's property. The neighbors, conditioned to either obey or ignore her, hadn't taken the bait, but Karen didn't need their approval. She needed control. And on that fateful morning, with Evan's truck disappearing around the corner, she saw her chance. Karen didn't waste time. She'd been planning this for days, maybe longer. Tucked under her arm was a pair of shiny red bolt cutters, the kind you'd find in a hardware store's discount bin, gleaming with the promise of defiance. She marched across the street, her knockoff designer wedges clicking against the pavement, her blonde bob bouncing with every determined step. The backyard gate, left unlocked because Evan trusted the neighborhood's general decency, swung open with a creak. Karen didn't hesitate. She strode to the shed, her clipboard abandoned for once, her eyes fixed on the heavy padlock securing the door. To her, this was justice. She was the HOA president, the guardian of Panorama Street's pristine image, and she was about to expose whatever danger Evan was hiding. She raised the bolt cutters, snapped the lock with a satisfying crunch, and pulled the door open. The moment the lock broke, everything changed. Inside the shed, a red LED light above the door began pulsing like a heartbeat, casting an eerie glow across the concrete floor. The interior lights snapped on, illuminating rows of military crates, sealed containers marked explosives, training only, and a sleek, remote-operated bomb disposal robot named Otis, its sensors glinting in the sudden brightness. A mechanical voice, calm but unyielding, cut through the silence. Warning: federal containment breach detected. Response initiated. Karen froze, her triumph evaporating as the reality of what she'd done sank in. This wasn't a stash of fertilizer or a secret chicken coop, as her HOA-fueled imagination had conjured. It looked like a terrorist's lair, or at least, that's what her panicked brain screamed as she took a step inside. The shed's security system wasn't just for show. Wired with motion sensors and linked to a DHS server, it was designed to alert authorities the second an unauthorized entry occurred. The broken lock triggered an immediate ping to a central command center, logging the breach as a potential national security threat. Karen, oblivious to the digital dominoes she'd toppled, stared at the crates, her breath hitching. She expected to find something mundane, something she could weaponize in her next HOA meeting. Instead, she saw blinking equipment, warning labels, and the kind of setup that belonged in a war zone, not a suburban backyard. Her scream ripped through the morning quiet, a high-pitched wail that could have shattered glass. She stumbled backward, tripped over her own feet, and ran face-first into Lisa's prized rose bush, thorns tearing at her hands and face as she flailed. Karen's panic didn't stop there. Scrambling to her feet, She yanked her phone from her pocket and dialed 911, her voice a breathless jumble of fear and self-righteousness. "I've uncovered a bomb-making operation," she shrieked to the dispatcher. "Panorama Street, Evan Carter's house. He's got explosives, military stuff. It's a terrorist bunker." She paced the backyard, ignoring the blood trickling from her scratched hands, convinced she'd just saved the neighborhood from certain doom. In her mind, she was a hero, the HOA president who'd exposed a criminal in their midst. She couldn't know, that the real threat was her own arrogance, and it was about to bring a federal storm down on her head. Less than 10 seconds after the shed's alarm triggered, a low drone rumbled through the neighborhood, like the hum of an approaching swarm. It wasn't thunder or a passing plane. It was the sound of a rapid response protocol kicking into gear. The DHS server, receiving the breach alert, had automatically dispatched a containment team from a nearby field office. Within minutes, black SUVs roared onto Panorama Street, their tires screeching as they blocked off both ends of the block. Federal agents in tactical gear spilled out, some wearing bomb suits that made them look like astronauts, others clutching rifles and barking orders. A helicopter circled overhead, its blades chopping the air, while a mobile command unit rolled in, setting up a perimeter of yellow tape that screamed, "Stay back." The neighbors, drawn by the commotion, peeked from behind curtains or stepped onto their porches, phones in hand, filming the chaos. Kids on bikes stopped mid-pedal, jaws dropping as the street transformed into a scene from a Hollywood blockbuster. Mrs. Tran clutched her Pomeranian, muttering prayers. Rick, Evan's firefighter neighbor, leaned against his fence, sipping iced tea and grinning like he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. His parrot, perched on his shoulder, squawked a string of Spanish curses, adding to the surreal atmosphere. And there, in the middle of it all, was Karen, standing on Evan's lawn, her hands bleeding, her face flushed, shouting at anyone who'd listen that she'd saved us all. Evan, meanwhile, was halfway back from the garden center, the bed of his truck loaded with mulch bags, when his phone buzzed. It was Delgado, his DHS contact, her voice clipped and urgent. "Evan, we've got a breach at your site. Sensors tripped 5 minutes ago. Response teams already en route. You nearby?" Evan's stomach dropped. He knew the shed security was ironclad, knew no one could access it without triggering exactly this kind of response. But he also knew who was likely responsible. "Karen," he muttered, gripping the steering wheel. "I'm 15 minutes out," he told Delgado, flooring the gas pedal. The peaceful errand had just turned into a race against chaos. By the time Evan turned onto Panorama Street, the block was unrecognizable. Flashing lights painted the houses in red and blue, barricades blocked his driveway, and agents swarmed like ants at a picnic. A bomb tech in a full ED suit was scanning the shed's exterior with a handheld device, while others cordoned off the backyard. The helicopter's roar made conversation impossible, and the neighbors' whispers had turned into a low hum of panic and curiosity. Evan parked a block away, grabbed his ID, and approached the perimeter, his heart pounding not from fear, but from the sheer absurdity of it all. He'd left for mulch, and now his street looked like a war zone. Before he could reach the tape, an agent in tactical gear spotted him, his rifle half-raised. "You, identify yourself." Evan held up his hands, his military training kicking in "Stay calm, don't escalate." "Evan Carter, homeowner. This is my property." The agent's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, another voice cut through the noise. "That's him." It was Delgado, striding toward him, her sharp eyes scanning the scene. She was in her element, her tight bun and no-nonsense demeanor unchanged from their days, working ops together. "Stand down," she ordered the agent, then turned to Evan, her expression a mix of exasperation and amusement. "You've got to be kidding me, Carter. I thought you retired to garden." Evan was about to explain when another agent grabbed his arm, pulling him toward a squad car. "Protocol," the agent grunted, and within seconds, Evan was face down on the hood of his own truck, hands behind his back, the cold metal pressing against his cheek. The neighbors gasped, their phones capturing every second. Karen, seated on the curb now, her hands wrapped in gauze from the rose bush, saw her chance. She leapt to her feet, pointing at Evan like a prosecutor in a courtroom drama. "That's the terrorist," she screamed. "He's hiding bombs. I told you, I told everyone." Her voice was shrill, her face red, but there was a gleam in her eyes, a mix of fear and vindication, like she'd finally won. Delgado stepped in before the situation could spiral further. "Uncuff him," she barked, her tone leaving no room for argument. The agent complied, and Evan straightened, rubbing his wrists. Delgado shot him a look that said, "We'll talk later," then turned her attention to Karen, who was still ranting about terrorism and community safety. "Ma'am," Delgado said, her voice cutting through Karen's tirade like a knife, "you just committed a federal crime." Karen blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "What?" she sputtered. "I'm the HOA president. I have every right to inspect suspicious structures." Delgado raised an eyebrow, her expression a masterclass in restrained contempt. "You broke into a secured federal facility, bypassed legal warnings, destroyed property, and triggered a national-level response protocol. Sit down." Karen sank back onto the curb, her bravado crumbling as the weight of Delgado's words hit her. The agents, meanwhile, were all business. They secured the shed, verifying that nothing had been tampered with beyond the broken lock. Otis, the bomb disposal robot, was powered down and wheeled back to its dock, its sensors blinking innocently. The crates were scanned, their seals intact, their contents confirmed as training gear. The bomb techs gave the all-clear, but the lockdown remained in place. A breach was a breach, and DHS didn't mess around with protocol. The helicopter circled lower, its spotlight sweeping the yard, while agents fanned out to interview neighbors and collect footage from security cameras. The neighborhood was a circus now. Kids clustered at the edge of the tape, whispering about spies and bombs. Adults filmed from their lawns, some live streaming to social media with hashtags like #PanoramaTakedown. Rick, still sipping his tea, gave Evan a thumbs up from his porch, his parrot screeching something that sounded suspiciously like Karen screwed. Mrs. Tran, clutching her dog, crossed herself and muttered about the end times. And Karen, the center of it all, kept talking, her voice growing hoarser as she tried to spin the narrative. "I was protecting the community," she insisted to an agent taking her statement. "He's the one hiding explosives. Check his garage, his basement, everything." The agent, a young guy with a crew cut, jotted down her words, his face unreadable. He'd heard it all before. Evan, cleared by Delgado, stood by the perimeter, watching the chaos unfold. He should have been furious, his property violated, his morning ruined, his name dragged through Karen's delusional accusations. But all he felt was a strange calm, the kind that comes from knowing you're on the right side of a fight. He'd warned her. He'd told her the shed was off limits, that opening it would bring consequences. She'd laughed, called him paranoid, assumed her HOA title gave her immunity. Now, as the feds swarmed and the neighbors gawked, Karen was learning the hard way that some doors are locked for a reason. Delgado pulled Evan aside, her radio crackling with updates from the command unit. "Walk me through it," she said, her voice low. Evan recounted everything, Karen's obsession, her inspections, her refusal to back off despite his warnings. He mentioned the trail cam, the upgraded sensors, the signs. Delgado nodded, her jaw tight. "She's lucky it was just a training unit," she said. "If this had been a live site, she'd be in a holding cell already." Evan glanced at Karen, who was now arguing with a paramedic trying to bandage her hands. "She thought she'd find something to find me for," he said. Instead, she found Otis. Delgado snorted, a rare crack in her professional veneer. Otis is the real hero here. The investigation moved fast. Agents canvassed the block, knocking on doors and collecting statements. Rick, eager to help, offered his security footage, which showed Karen lurking by Evan's gate the day before, bolt cutters in hand. Mrs. Tran, usually shy, told an agent about Karen's history of overreach, fines for ugly flowers, citations for noisy kids. The neighbors, emboldened by the feds' presence, started spilling years of grievances. Karen, oblivious to the tide turning against her, kept digging her hole deeper. She demanded to speak to a supervisor, insisted the agents were covering for Evan, even accused Delgado of being part of a conspiracy. Delgado, unfazed, handed her a citation notice listing her infractions: trespassing, destruction of federal property, triggering a false emergency protocol, and interfering with a DHS operation. As the agents wrapped up their initial sweep, the media arrived. A local news van parked at the corner, its crew scrambling to set up cameras. A reporter, microphone in hand, tried to get a statement from Delgado, who waved them off. The neighbors, however, were less reserved. A few offered sound bites, their voices a mix of shock and glee. "She's been terrorizing us for years," one woman said, her phone still recording. About time she got what's coming. The reporter zeroed in on Karen, who saw the camera and launched into a tearful rant about protecting the community and ungrateful neighbors. It was a performance, but it fell flat. The feds weren't buying it, and neither was anyone else. Evan, cleared to return to his property, surveyed the damage. The shed door hung open, its broken lock dangling like a trophy of Karen's stupidity. The rose bush was a mangled mess, petals scattered across the grass. His mulch bags sat untouched in the truck, a reminder of the normalcy he'd been chasing just an hour ago. He wanted to laugh, to rage, to do something, but instead, he just stood there, letting the absurdity sink in. Karen had thought she'd expose him, humiliate him, cement her power. Instead, she'd unleashed a federal response that would haunt her for years. The shed, with its blinking light and silent robot, had done exactly what it was designed to do: protect itself. And Evan, caught in the crossfire, was already planning his next move. The lockdown lasted another hour, the agents methodically documenting the scene. Otis was photographed, the crates cataloged, the sensors reset. Delgado assured Evan the shed could stay operational, but there'd be paperwork, lots of it. "You're in the clear," she said, clapping his shoulder. But her? She's got a long road ahead. Evan nodded, his eyes on Karen, who was now slumped on the curb, her phone confiscated, her bravado gone. The neighbors watched, their whispers growing bolder. Rick raised his tea glass in a mock toast. The parrot squawked. And somewhere, deep in the shed, the red light blinked once, as if to say, "Game over." The dust hadn't even settled on Panorama Street when the fallout from Karen Thompson's shed fiasco began to ripple outward, transforming a quiet suburban block into a battleground of whispers, accusations, and federal scrutiny. The black SUVs and bomb techs in their hulking ED suits were still packing up, the yellow tape fluttering in the breeze, but the real chaos was just beginning. Karen, the once untouchable HOA president, sat on the curb, her hands bandaged from her rose bush dive, her face a mask of defiance and denial. She triggered a federal response by breaking into Evan Carter's DHS-registered shed, expecting to uncover a scandal, but instead unleashing a storm that would unravel her carefully constructed empire. For Evan, the retired Army EOD specialist who just wanted to grow tomatoes, it was a moment of vindication, but also the start of a deeper reckoning for the neighborhood he'd called home for barely a month. The scene on Panorama Street was surreal, like something ripped from a low-budget action flick. The helicopter had finally peeled off, its roar fading into the distance, but the flashing lights from the remaining federal vehicles cast an eerie glow across the lawns. Neighbors clustered in small groups, their phones glowing as they recorded the spectacle or texted frantic updates to friends. Kids, barred from getting too close, whispered about spies and bombs, their imaginations running wild. Rick, Evan's firefighter neighbor, stood on his porch, sipping iced tea and grinning like he'd won the lottery. His parrot, perched on his shoulder, let out a string of Spanish profanities that drew nervous laughs from anyone close enough to hear. Mrs. Tran, clutching her Pomeranian, muttered prayers and shot wary glances at Karen, who was now arguing with a young DHS agent taking her statement. The agent, barely hiding his exasperation, scribbled notes as Karen ranted about community threats and her right to inspect Evan's property. Evan, cleared by Agent Delgado, stood near the perimeter tape, his arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold. He should have been furious, his shed violated, his morning hijacked, his name slandered by Karen's delusional accusations. But instead, he felt a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from knowing your enemy has overplayed their hand. Karen had laughed off his warnings, mocked his insistence that the shed was a federal matter. Now, with DHS agents swarming and her bolt cutters lying in an evidence bag, she was learning the hard way that some rules aren't written in an HOA handbook. Delgado, ever the professional, caught Evan's eye and gave a slight nod, her way of saying, "We've got this." Evan nodded back, but his mind was already racing. This wasn't just about a broken lock. It was about a neighborhood waking up to the tyrant they'd let rule them for too long. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of activity. DHS agents fanned out across the block, knocking on doors and collecting statements. They weren't just investigating the breach, they were building a case, piecing together Karen's intent, and whether it was vandalism, ignorance, or something more sinister. The shed, listed as a containment-grade equipment facility, demanded a worst-case scenario response, which meant mandatory reports, security sweeps, and a deep dive into anyone who tampered with it. Karen, in her arrogance, had assumed her HOA title gave her immunity. She was wrong. The feds didn't care about her clipboard or her self-proclaimed authority. They cared about risk, and anyone willing to cut through a federal lock was a risk by definition. Karen, meanwhile, couldn't stop talking. Seated on the curb, she alternated between pleading her case and lashing out, her voice growing hoarser with every word. "I was protecting the neighborhood," she insisted to anyone who'd listen. "He's hiding bombs. You saw those crates, those machines. Why isn't he in cuffs?" The agents, trained to deal with everything from terrorists to tantrums, let her ramble, their faces impassive. One, a sharp-looking guy named Rainey, took detailed notes, his pen moving faster as Karen accused Evan of everything from terrorism to undermining community standards. She even demanded the agents search his garage, convinced they'd find a weapons cache next to his lawnmower. Rainey's lips twitched, the closest he came to a smile, but he kept writing. Karen was digging her own grave, and every word was another shovelful of dirt. The neighbors, emboldened by the feds' presence, started to speak up. Years of Karen's petty tyranny, fines for ugly mailboxes, citations for noisy kids, complaints about unapproved flower beds came pouring out. Mrs. Tran, usually soft-spoken, told an agent about the time Karen tried to fine her for a non-compliant bird feeder. Another neighbor, a single mom named Gina, recounted how Karen had issued a $200 fine for a basketball hoop that clashed with the aesthetic. Rick, ever the showman, offered his security footage, which showed Karen lurking by Evan's gate the day before, bolt cutters in hand, her face set in a determined scowl. "She's been sniffing around that shed for weeks," Rick told the agent, his parrot squawking agreement. "Warned Evan she was trouble. Guess she proved me right." The real bombshell came when Rainey returned from canvassing with a tablet in hand, his expression a mix of disbelief and glee. He handed it to Delgado, who scrolled through the footage, her eyebrows climbing higher with every second. She passed it to Evan, who stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. It was a video Karen had posted on the community forum just days earlier, her voice brimming with self-righteous zeal. "I'm going to find out what that weirdo on the corner lot is hiding," she declared, her blonde bob bouncing as she gestured at Evan's house. "If the HOA doesn't act, I'll crack that bunker open myself." The video ended with a smug smile, as if she'd already won. Evan handed the tablet back, his voice low. "Premeditation." Delgado nodded, her eyes glinting with the kind of focus that had made her a legend in ops. "This changes everything." The video was a gift, a self-inflicted wound that turned Karen's case from a simple trespass to a federal offense with intent. Delgado wasted no time. She radioed her team, ordering them to contact legal and secure the footage as evidence. Karen, still oblivious, kept ranting, unaware that her own words had just sealed her fate. The agents moved with precision, cataloging the shed's contents, sealed training crates, disarmed mock-ups of IEDs, and Otis, the bomb disposal robot, now powered down and looking almost comical in its charging dock. The broken lock was photographed, bagged, and tagged. The sensors were reset, the red LED above the door blinking calmly once more. Evan's trail cam, hidden in its fake birdhouse, provided crystal-clear footage of Karen's break-in, her bolt cutters gleaming as she snapped the lock. It was airtight, undeniable, and devastating. As the feds wrapped up their initial sweep, the media descended like vultures. A local news van parked at the corner, its crew scrambling to set up cameras and lights. A reporter, her hair sprayed into submission, tried to corner Delgado for a statement, but Delgado waved her off with a curt, "No comment." The neighbors, however, were less restrained. Gina, the single mom, gave a fiery soundbite about Karen's reign of terror, her voice shaking with years of pent-up frustration. "She's been bullying us forever," she said, her kids watching from the porch. This is justice." Another neighbor, a retired teacher named Walter, mumbled something about community harmony, but quickly backtracked when he saw the cameras. Rick, never one to miss a moment, leaned into the mic and said, "Karen thought she was the law. Turns out, the law's got bigger bolt cutters." The news segment aired that evening, titled "Suburban Bomb Scare," when an HOA goes too far. It was a garish mix of drone footage showing Evan's blurred backyard, shaky clips of Karen on the curb, and an overdramatic reenactment complete with a fake shed and stock explosion sounds. The reporter's voiceover leaned hard into the drama, calling it a shocking breach of national security and a wake-up call for suburban America. Evan, watching from his living room, groaned at the hyperbole, but couldn't help a wry smile. The segment was absurd, but it was also a public gut punch to Karen's ego. Social media lit up, with hashtags like #KarenTheShedBomber and #PanoramaTakedown trending locally. Memes sprouted overnight. Karen's face photoshopped onto a cartoon villain, a rose bush labeled the real hero, and Otis the robot with a superhero cape. Karen, undeterred by the mounting evidence, doubled down. She filed a civil lawsuit against Evan the next day, claiming emotional distress, public defamation, and endangerment. Her complaint, a masterpiece of delusion, accused Evan of creating a dangerous environment by storing bomb-making materials and orchestrating her humiliation. She even suggested he'd enticed her into the shed, knowing it would trigger a response. Evan's lawyer, a grizzled ex-JAG officer named Patel, laughed when he read it. "This is fiction," he said, tossing the papers on his desk. "She's got nothing but her own ego." Patel wasn't wrong, but Karen's audacity was a reminder of how far she'd go to save face. She wasn't just fighting Evan, she was fighting reality itself. The neighborhood, meanwhile, was fracturing. Karen's allies, a small but vocal group of HOA loyalists, tried to rally support, whispering about Evan's secretive shed and military connections. But the tide had turned. Years of Karen's overreach, fines for dog barking, citations for unapproved holiday lights, complaints about kids' chalk drawings, had left most residents fed up. Gina, the single mom, organized an impromptu meeting at her house where neighbors aired their grievances. One woman brought receipts for a $150 fine Karen had issued for a non-compliant mailbox. Another showed photos of Karen parking in his driveway, then citing him for an unauthorized vehicle. The stories piled up, each one a brick in the wall of resentment that had been building for years. The HOA itself was imploding. Walter, the treasurer and Karen's reluctant sidekick, tried to hold an emergency board meeting to address the incident. It was a disaster. The community center was packed, the air thick with tension. Walter, his voice cracking, stammered through an apology for recent events and tried to move on to budget updates. Someone in the back shouted, "Talk about the shed." Another yelled, "What about the missing money?" The room erupted, neighbors who'd once kept their heads down now demanding answers. Walter admitted, under pressure, that Karen had controlled certain discretionary budgets, bypassing oversight with emergency clauses in the bylaws. She was loud, he mumbled, and had a lot of binders. The audience roared, their laughter bitter. Even the Tran family, usually silent, called for Karen's resignation, an irony, given she was already facing federal charges. Delgado's arrival at the meeting was the final nail in Karen's coffin. She entered quietly, her tactical vest replaced by a blazer, but her presence commanded the room. She handed Walter an official notice. The HOA was now part of a federal review. Every board member would be interviewed, and any attempt to alter or destroy documents would be considered obstruction. The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Delgado turned to Evan, gave a brief nod, and left. The meeting dissolved into chaos, with neighbors shouting over each other and Walter looking like he might faint. The HOA board was paralyzed, its bylaws now a noose tightening around its own neck. The investigation deepened over the next few days. DHS, armed with Karen's video and Evan's trail cam footage, opened a parallel probe into the HOA's finances. Agent Rainey, the young hotshot who'd found the forum post, dug through years of records and uncovered a trail of suspicious transactions. Thousands of dollars meant for tree maintenance, park benches, and irrigation systems had vanished, funneled through a community betterment committee that existed only on paper. The account, tied to Karen's personal bank, showed withdrawals for beautification projects with no invoices or receipts. It wasn't just mismanagement, it was embezzlement, plain and simple. Karen, it seemed, had used the shed as a distraction, a way to rally the neighborhood against Evan while deflecting attention from her own crimes. The neighbors, once cowed by Karen's clipboard, found their spines. Gina, who'd emerged as a leader, circulated a petition to remove Karen from the HOA and hold a special election. It gathered signatures faster than a viral meme, with even Walter signing in a moment of guilty defiance. Residents started sharing stories online, creating a group chat called Panorama Freedom, where they posted screenshots of Karen's old citations and rants. One woman uploaded a photo of a dog barking, fine issued for her cat. Another shared a video of Karen berating a kid for skateboarding, her voice shrill and unhinged. The group chat became a digital bonfire, burning away years of fear and silence. Evan, caught in the eye of the storm, stayed low-key. Delgado had warned him to avoid the spotlight while the legal gears turned. He answered the Fed's questions, provided his DHS contract details, and let Patel handle Karen's lawsuit. The shed remained operational, its new lock reinforced and its sensors upgraded. Otis, the robot, sat quietly in its dock, a silent sentinel. Evan spent his days repairing the rose bush, tending his garden, and fielding texts from old army buddies who'd seen the news. "You always did attract trouble," one wrote, attaching a meme of Karen's face on a wanted poster. Evan chuckled, but didn't reply. He didn't need to. The truth was doing all the talking. Karen's world, meanwhile, was collapsing. The federal charges, trespassing, destruction of property, false emergency protocol, interference with a DHS operation were bad enough. But the financial probe was worse. Rainey's team found emails where Karen instructed Walter to approve questionable expenses, bypassing the board. They uncovered a pattern of fabricated fines, used to pressure residents into compliance or fund her projects. The HOA, desperate to avoid liability, voted to suspend her immediately, citing ethical violations. Walter resigned 2 days later, citing exhaustion, and Gina stepped in as interim chair, promising transparency and reform. The media frenzy grew, with national outlets picking up the story. A cable news segment dubbed it the shed that shook suburbia, complete with pundits debating HOA overreach and vigilante neighbors. Karen, holed up in her house, refused interviews, but her lawsuit kept her in the headlines. Patel, Evan's lawyer, filed a countersuit for damages and defamation, backed by DHS's own claim for breach-related costs. The evidence was overwhelming. Karen's video, the trail cam, the neighbors' affidavits, the financial records. Patel called it the easiest case I've ever had. Karen's attorney, a harried man who looked like he regretted taking her on, tried to negotiate a settlement, but Evan wasn't interested. He didn't want her money. He wanted her to face the consequences. The neighborhood, free from Karen's grip, began to heal. Gina repealed dozens of Karen's citations, including fines for non-compliant mailboxes and excessive holiday lights. Residents started opening up, inviting Evan to barbecues and potlucks. Kids helped him repaint the shed, which now sported a DHS training zone placard, a gift from Delgado. Rick, ever the instigator, suggested nominating Otis for HOA president, his parrot squawking approval. The laughter, once stifled by Karen's rules, echoed across the block. Panorama Street was waking up, and Karen's reign was a fading nightmare. But the story wasn't over. Karen's lawsuit went to court a week later, a spectacle of desperation and delusion. She arrived in a discount power suit, arguing with the bailiff over parking validation. Her attorney, visibly exhausted, tried to argue that Evan had provoked her by maintaining a dangerous shed. Patel dismantled the claim in minutes, presenting the DHS contract, the warning signs, and Karen's own video, her voice boasting about cracking that bunker open. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with a gray bun, shut Karen down when she tried to interrupt. "Sit down, Miss Thompson," she said, her tone icy. The case was dismissed with prejudice, and the judge suggested Karen seek counsel before filing again. The DHS suit, filed the next day, hit her with damages and interference charges, ensuring she'd be paying for years. Karen's house went up for sale soon after, its pristine hedges neglected, its porch light off. She packed under cover of night, no goodbye, no note. The listing was flagged for code violations, ironic, given her obsession with rules. Word spread that she'd moved across town to a community without an HOA, her reputation trailing her like a shadow. Panorama Street, meanwhile, bloomed. Mailboxes sprouted in wild shapes, gardens exploded with color, and a mural of a giant bolt cutter appeared on the park wall, captioned, "Not today, Karen." Evan, sipping a beer on his porch, raised a glass to the neighborhood. The shed's red light blinked once, a quiet reminder that some battles are won by standing your ground. The echoes of Karen Thompson's catastrophic misstep lingered on Panorama Street, but they were no longer a source of dread. Instead, they'd become a badge of triumph, a shared story that neighbors recounted with laughter and a touch of disbelief. The once oppressive weight of her HOA tyranny had lifted, replaced by a newfound sense of freedom and community. The black SUVs and bomb techs were gone, the yellow tape a distant memory, but the transformation they'd sparked was just beginning. Evan Carter, the retired Army ED specialist at the heart of it all, stood in his backyard, surveying the freshly planted rose bushes that had replaced the ones Karen mangled in her panic. The shed, its new lock gleaming and its red LED blinking calmly, stood as a silent sentinel, a symbol of the line she'd crossed and the consequences she'd reaped. Panorama Street was no longer just a place to live. It was a community reborn, and Karen's downfall was the catalyst. In the weeks following the shed incident, the neighborhood underwent a metamorphosis. The beige fences and obsessively trimmed hedges that once defined Panorama Street gave way to bursts of color and personality. Gardens bloomed with wildflowers, mailboxes sprouted in quirky shapes, a fire hydrant here, a miniature lighthouse there, and wind chimes, once banned by Karen's draconian rules, tinkled in the breeze. The street, once stifled by her clipboard and fines, exhaled a collective sigh of relief. Kids played basketball without fear of citations, dogs barked freely, and neighbors waved to each other with genuine warmth. It was as if Karen's breach had cracked open more than just a shed. It had shattered the invisible chains she'd wrapped around the block. Gina, the ex-police officer and mother of 3 who'd stepped into the HOA presidency after Karen's ousting, was the architect of this revival. She brought structure without suffocation, rewriting the bylaws to prioritize fairness over control. Her first act was to repeal every one of Karen's baseless citations, from fines for non-compliant curtains to penalties for excessive holiday lights. Residents received refund notices for years of unjust fees, and the HOA's budget was opened for public review, a stark contrast to Karen's secretive Community Betterment Committee. Gina's no-nonsense approach, honed by years on the force and raising teenagers, earned her the trust Karen never had. "We're a neighborhood, not a prison," she said at her first meeting, her voice firm but kind. "Let's act like it." Evan, who'd kept a low profile during the legal fallout, found himself embraced by the community he'd once felt like an outsider in. Neighbors who'd avoided him, wary of Karen's wrath, now invited him to barbecues and potlucks. Kids helped him repaint the shed, its new coat of gray gleaming under a DHS-issued placard that read "Training Zone, authorized personnel only." Rick, the firefighter next door, joked that they should nominate Otis, the bomb disposal robot, for HOA president, his parrot squawking in agreement. The laughter, once muted by Karen's rules, became the soundtrack of Panorama Street, a reminder that joy could grow even from chaos. The shed itself, once a source of suspicion, became a symbol of resilience. Gina approached Evan with an idea: turn it into a learning center for emergency awareness, a way to demystify its contents and teach kids how to respond to real dangers. At first, Evan was skeptical. The shed wasn't a toy, it housed real training gear, even if it was inert. But the idea grew on him, especially when Agent Delgado, his DHS contact, gave it her enthusiastic support. "It's a chance to turn a mess into something good," she said, her sharp eyes glinting with approval. Together, they launched Safe Zone, a scaled-down bomb squad training exhibit. They installed clear signage, roped off restricted areas, and set up mock devices with educational guides. Otis, freshly painted and sporting a playful bow tie courtesy of Rick, became the star attraction. Every Saturday for 6 weeks, families flocked to the shed for walkthroughs, safety briefings, and hands-on lessons. Kids marveled at Otis's articulated arms, parents asked thoughtful questions about emergency protocols, and Evan, in his element, explained the difference between real threats and training tools. "Some doors are locked for a reason," he told a group of wide-eyed 4th graders, gesturing to the shed's reinforced door. "Respect that, and you'll stay safe." The turnout was staggering. Nearly every family on the block showed up, along with curious residents from nearby streets. The local school board even asked to add Safe Zone to its field trip list, calling it a unique blend of education and community healing. Evan didn't charge a dime. He didn't want money. He wanted understanding, the kind Karen never had. Delgado visited often, sometimes bringing DHS trainees to assist with the programs. She told Evan the shed incident had become a case study in 2 departments, used to train agents on legal overreach, community intervention, and the consequences of unauthorized interference. "Karen's a cautionary tale now," she said, smirking. "They're calling it the bolt cutter blunder." Evan chuckled, but the irony wasn't lost on him. Karen had wanted to expose him, to cement her power. Instead, she'd handed him a platform to educate and unite the neighborhood, all while her own legacy crumbled. Karen, meanwhile, was a ghost. Her house, once the picture of HOA perfection, stood neglected, its hedges overgrown and its petunias wilting. She'd put it up for sale quietly, no fanfare, no open house. Neighbors whispered that she'd packed under cover of night, her SUV loaded with boxes, her porch light off for the first time in years. The listing was flagged for multiple code violations, ironic, given her obsession with enforcing them, and sat on the market for weeks, a silent testament to her fall. Word spread that she'd moved to a condo across town, in a community with no HOA, either by choice or necessity. Her reputation, thanks to viral news clips and shared videos from Panorama's Freedom group chat, followed her like a curse. Rumor had it her new neighbors had seen her old forum posts, including the infamous crack that bunker open rant, and weren't thrilled to have her around. The legal consequences piled up. The federal charges, trespassing, destruction of property, false emergency protocol, and interference with a DHS operation carried hefty fines and the threat of jail time. DHS's separate suit for damages and breach-related costs added to her woes, as did the HOA's countersuit to recover misused funds. The financial probe had uncovered thousands in embezzled dues, funneled through Karen's fake betterment committee, and the evidence was damning. Emails, bank records, and testimony from former board members desperate to distance themselves. Karen's civil lawsuit against Evan, claiming emotional distress and defamation, was laughed out of court, her own video sealing her defeat. The judge's dismissal was scathing, her suggestion that Karen seek better counsel, a public humiliation. She was buried under legal fees and fines, a far cry from the days when she fined neighbors for mailbox colors. The neighborhood, freed from her grip, leaned into its newfound unity. Gina organized the first annual Panorama Block Fair, a celebration of everything Karen had suppressed. Food stalls lined the street, kids played games, and a talent show showcased everything from guitar solos to a surprisingly good dog trick routine. The fire department, in a nod to the Shed saga, brought a bomb squad vehicle for the kids to explore, its lights flashing as they climbed inside. Otis, rolled out in tandem, drew cheers, with some kids wearing homemade t-shirts that read "Keep calm" and "Let Otis handle it." The mood was electric, a mix of relief and defiance, as if the block had finally reclaimed its soul. At the fair, Delgado pulled Evan aside and handed him a framed photo. It was a still from the Shed's trail cam, capturing Karen mid-scream as she opened the door, the red LED glowing ominously behind her. Below it, a plaque read, "Curiosity detonated the Karen." Evan burst out laughing, the kind of deep, cathartic laugh he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just a picture, it was a monument to Karen's hubris, a frozen moment that encapsulated her downfall. He hung it inside the shed, above the tool rack, where it served as a reminder that sometimes the best revenge is living well while your enemy unravels. Evan and his wife, Lisa, rebuilt their garden, planting new rose bushes and expanding the tomato beds. They adopted a dog, a scrappy mutt they named Bolt, a nod to both his speed and the infamous bolt cutters that started it all. Bolt took to napping beside Otis, the two becoming unofficial mascots of the street. Neighbors stopped by to pet him, kids drew chalk portraits of him on the sidewalk, and Rick declared him the real HOA president. The Shed, once a source of fear, was now a point of pride, its DHS placard a badge of the neighborhood's resilience. The block continued to evolve. A mural appeared on the HOA clubhouse wall, depicting a comically oversized shed with a neon "Do Not Enter" sign and a cartoon Karen fleeing from Otis. Below it, in bold letters, was the phrase, "Not today, Karen." It wasn't just art, it was a declaration, a promise that the days of petty tyranny were over. Block parties became a regular event, with potlucks and movie nights in the cul-de-sac. One evening, someone played the news segment about the Shed incident on a projector, the crowd howling at the reenactment's cheesy explosion effects and Karen's rose bush tumble. It wasn't mockery, it was catharsis, a shared laugh at the absurdity that had once controlled them. Karen's name became a punchline, a cautionary tale told with eye rolls and grins. Kids nicknamed her Boom Boom Karen, and the group chat overflowed with memes, her face on a dynamite stick, her scream paired with a mushroom cloud. The media moved on, but the story lived on in Panorama's lore, a legend of the woman who thought she could outsmart a federal shed and lost everything. Evan, sipping coffee on his porch one evening, listened to the crickets and felt a peace he hadn't known since his army days. The nightmares of Yoda, once frequent, had faded. The shed, with its quiet hum and blinking light, was no longer a reminder of conflict, but a symbol of victory. Rick, dragging a lawn chair to Evan's porch, summed it up best. "Man, if you'd told me a year ago our biggest threat was a lady with a clipboard, I'd have laughed in your face," he said, his parrot squawking agreement. "But you know what? She didn't just lose. We won." Evan raised his coffee mug, clinking it against Rick's tea glass. "To the people who keep it sane," he said. The mural glowed in the distance, the shed's light blinked once, and the neighborhood hummed with life. And so, Panorama Street thrived, its scars transformed into stories, its silence replaced by laughter. Karen had wanted power, but she'd earned infamy. She'd sought control, but she'd lost it all, her title, her home, her pride. The rules she'd wielded like a club had caught up to her, not with fines, but with court dates and a legacy of ridicule. Evan, Lisa, Bolt, and Otis stood at the heart of a community that had learned to fight back, not with anger, but with unity, not with vengeance, but with joy. The shed, once a spark of conflict, was now a beacon of resilience, its red light a quiet promise that some doors, when opened, reveal not just chaos but the strength to rebuild. And in that strength, Panorama Street found its future, a future where no Karen, no clipboard, no bolt cutters could ever dim its light again.